Welcome back. We are having our first conversation of the morning, and this one will be via Zoom. We have with us Harry Locke, and he is the editorial manager for the Public Media Alliance, as well as Desalyn Daniels, and she is the advocacy coordinator for the Public Media Alliance. Good morning and welcome, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So we are jumping into our first conversation, and it's about Global Media and Information Literacy Week. But before we even get into that conversation, I'd just like you guys to introduce yourselves and the Public Media Alliance organization.
Sure. So the Public Media Alliance is a global association of public service broadcasters. So the publicly funded and run organizations, broadcasters across the world. So we have organizations from 6 continents that are our members, including the BBC here in the UK, where I'm based, as well as at the ABC in Australia, as well as broadcasters in the Caribbean as well. So RJ Argelina in Jamaica, for example, or NC and Guyana. Our role as the association of these broadcasters is to be an advocate and a spokesperson for the principles and values of public service media. And when I talk about those values, it's the independence, trust, accountability, the sort of the core values which define what public service media is. And so we speak out on issues affecting public service media worldwide. So where we see those values under threat, we sort of espouse the values that we hold dear, which we all hold dear as sort of believers in the fundamental importance of public service media and its role in society, and of course its role in promoting media literacy as well, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
How has, and we'll jump right into discussion. Thank you for explaining your role as the Public Media Alliance. How has social media, that's where I want to start, changed the landscape when it comes to media and information literacy? Has it presented greater challenges for users in terms of false and misleading information online?
So yeah, most definitely social media has changed the landscape. I mean, we are living in the information age, and that just naturally brings more complexity, and sometimes it can be an overwhelming world of media and information, with social media being a central part of that. So just bringing that back to media and information literacy really is a skill, and it's a skill that we can use to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media in various forms. So media literacy involves understanding both not just like traditional media, like newspapers and television, but it's also about how you can understand and navigate digital and social media platforms. It's really about helping people become kind of critical consumers and producers of media content, whether that content is in print, whether it's on the radio, whether it's on television, or whether it's on social media. So mis and disinformation, whether it's in the Caribbean or more globally, is quite prolific, is quite rampant on social media. So media and information literacy really helps consumers access the media so they can access social media, but also analyze those media messages that they come across on social media, evaluate the content, understand perhaps where the influence of the media content they're consuming on social media, what influences that, considering aspects such as who owns the media that they're consuming. And that isn't just social media, not just understanding social media, but understanding media more broadly.
What's the, and I was, you kind of answered the question briefly there, Ms. Daniels, but I was going to ask, what is the basic approach that a reader or a viewer can take in terms of media literacy and getting a greater understanding as an analyst or a basic level analyst or critic in reading or listening, what's a basic approach that one can take?
Well, there are many approaches, but I think the first one is just really questioning everything that you see, questioning what is the purpose of this media that's presented to me? Who's created it? Who's this message for? What are some of maybe the explicit things that are being said, but maybe some of the more implicit or underlying messages? And a big part of that as well is questioning the source. For a lot of us, it's quite easy to automatically trust the things of the people who are within our circle, whether it's our families or maybe it's a politician that we support. We automatically kind of take that information and put more value over it maybe than we would from an external source. But regardless of the source, we need to be critical and really consider and look at the picture from all angles. So it's really just about questioning even the things that you might not typically think you need to question. Question everything that comes to you.
And if I can just, if I can just sort of build on what Desi said there, I think, in our position, we work in the media, both Desi and I trained as journalists. We sort of know what we're looking for and we know who we can trust because we know the processes that journalists go through to be in that position. And it's a very sort of privileged position because you're trusted by your audience. And I think, and sort of going back to your previous question on social media, part of the problem is that there's almost a proliferation of journalists now, but it's maybe a simple understanding of what a journalist is without the sort of rigorous training into what goes in to actually being a professional journalist. And so we understand what we're looking for when we're seeing something on a timeline, or whether it's Facebook or Instagram or, TikTok. We know, what sort of scrutiny do we need to apply to those people who are, presenting these news stories. But I think there's a real need to make sure that education and that understanding is rolled out to the general public because, as Desi said, it's not always, if you see something presented and it looks professional, well, chances are you might trust it.
Yeah.
So I think, we really need to educate as to actually why public service media in particular, but, other sort of trusted media with values and with the sort of principles and accountability, why they need to be trusted perhaps more than just a sort of a person who hasn't gone through that process as well. And then we sort of come on to issues as well where, the verification ticks on Twitter or X, as I suppose we call it now, where that can just be purchased.
Yeah.
And that causes a huge issue when if you're a user and you're just scrolling through on your phone and you see this person reporting this and they've got a verified tick, but they're not verified, they've just paid for that. That causes a huge issue as well, I think.
Interesting.
Now, I know that you guys developed a global task force to essentially defend the values, as your website has, of public media. I want to talk a bit about that, just to get more details, especially since you have, or this alliance works with different media organizations all over the world. I just want to get a bit more information on how that works.
Sure. So the Public Media Alliance is actually separate to the Global Task Force. So the Global Task Force for Public Media was set up, I think, in 2019, and that is the Director Generals or CEOs of 8 of the sort of the foremost public service media organizations across the world. So that is the BBC, ABC Australia, CBC Radio Canada, France Télévisions, Swedish Television, KBS South Korea, and ZDF Germany, and Radio New Zealand. And that was basically set up to recognize that public media worldwide is under threat. And this again comes down to a media literacy issue. It all comes back to media literacy because people don't necessarily understand why public media is so important. And so the Global Task Force was established so that we had 8 broadcasters who were able to get together and to issue statements upon issues of importance where those values and those fundamental principles of public service media were under attack. And so, if we sort of look at the sorts of statements that they've been issuing, particularly, and actually going back to the whole debacle around Twitter earlier this year, which, as you may remember, Twitter decided to all of a sudden label pretty much every single public broadcaster around the world as either government-funded media or state-affiliated media, even in the case of NPR in the US. That's hugely problematic when it comes to understanding a broadcaster and what they are. Now, public service media, that by describing it as government funded, you are drawing a line between the government and the public broadcaster and saying the government funds you, therefore you must be a spokesperson of the government, when actually that was just not the case in terms of a number of public service media organizations who are very independent and have really stringent rules and regulations which defend their independence from the political party, the ruling political party of the day. And so in that instance, the Global Task Force issued a statement defending why they should not be described as government-funded media. And in the end, Elon Musk and the executive team behind Twitter sort of revoked that decision and removed all labels, which again is quite problematic, because then they actually removed all the state-affiliated labels which were issued for those organizations, which I think there is reasonable grounds to describe them as such. So, Russia Today, the Russian international broadcaster, or CGTN in China, for example.
One of the reasons why I brought up social media initially during the conversation is because people have their biases, and we no longer have a situation in media where it's simply traditional media sources as we did in the past, right? And so with traditional media sources, you know where this information is coming from. You go to your trusted source and you get your information, and you know, all right. But with the emergence of social media, information information is presented to appease everyone's bias. So then you have a situation where each individual could find a piece of news that fits their perception, that fits their understanding, that fits what they believe is fact, and share that information. When it comes to fake news, how then do you convince or seek to educate groups in terms of identifying fake news and from what is facts and what is real news in the midst of this bias that we tend to have and hold on to when it comes to news that is out there on social media?
Wow, that's a big question, and I think that's an issue that organizations around the world are still grappling with daily, especially with the landscape changing constantly. It's like every time you make a step forward and you find one kind of solution, you're having to find new solutions to new problems. So that's a big ask, and that's a big question right there.
Yeah.
I wonder if you guys were able to collect information on the different generations and how they consume information, whether it's through more modern ways like social media, or through more traditional ways like newspapers or the general news that you'd see on the television. Is this something that you were able to gather information on, the different generations and how they consume information?
Certainly. So the Reuters, so this isn't something that we personally do, but the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, which is based at the University of Oxford here in the UK, publishes a digital news report every year. And that basically looks at methods of news consumption. And I think, just from sort of memory of the past, of the sort of the previous iteration of that study, it certainly shows that there is a generational divide in terms of how people consume news, and younger generations are obviously much more inclined to use social media for that, which obviously exposes them to a level of fake news, as we've talked about, that social media just hosts. And despite, efforts by some social media platforms to sort of moderate that, it's still endemic. And it's sort of collectively referred to as the infodemic. There's just so much information out there within this ecosystem. So younger generations are much more, I suppose, sort of exposed to that. As you sort of go up through the generations, you see that older generations are particularly still sort of reliant upon the more analog, linear models of distribution, content distribution, so TV and radio, for example. But it is changing, and you shouldn't just paint sort of broad brushstrokes. There will still be a large contingent within those older generations. It's hard because how do you educate people that your broadcaster is trusted and all the processes you go through, when actually, particularly with younger generations, if they're not consuming your content through broadcast, through TV or radio, how are you reaching them? So what we're seeing is a lot of public service media organizations now, shifting away from their traditional heartland base of broadcast, and actually recognizing they need to be prevalent and really prominent on these third-party platforms as well, to make sure that they are reaching these younger generations. But as I say, all generations really, because these social media platforms are so prolific now and so widespread, just across all age groups, that is really needed to do. They really need to be present there.
And you made an excellent point, Harry, because that is certainly the case here in Belize as well. I mean, we've spoken about social media and how these our local news media have had to adapt and develop Instagram pages to share our news, develop Facebook pages, develop TikTok, and now even WhatsApp channels now. So there's a constant need to adapt with the emergence of social media to reach as many of our consumers as possible, because a lot of them are saying that they prefer to simply get news in short bouts of information instead of having or watching an entire newscast. They prefer a 30-second clip of what exactly that news is about. So then my question to you, Harry, would be, do you believe that these more traditional way of providing information or sharing information will ultimately become obsolete? Or is it just something that there will be news for every person and what they desire to consume it?
Obsolete, I wouldn't say they would become obsolete. But I think the emphasis is just changing, and what we're experiencing at the moment is a realignment of priorities. So for France Télévisions, the BBC, ABC Australia, a lot of organizations are recalibrating, and they are adopting what they're calling digital first strategies. So this isn't by any means saying we're done with TV and radio, that they're done, because that's just not the case. And we still see, here in the UK, we still see, 10 million people tune in to a Sunday night drama or something on BBC. So to just say no one watches TV anymore, it would just not be true. But habits are changing. We now see, the OTT platforms, so streaming video on demand platforms that a number of broadcasters have developed. They are now becoming increasingly popular. So people aren't necessarily watching TV as and when it's scheduled for broadcast. They're watching it on catch up 2-3 days later. The habits are changing. Broadcasters are having to develop the technology to make sure that they're remaining accessible and that they're providing the services that audiences now expect. I mean, Netflix has caused a lot of problems within the media ecosystem, but what they have done is given greater accessibility for audiences in terms of, audiences can watch whatever they want now, whenever. And broadcasters have had to adapt to that and establish their own platforms which mirror that service. So I don't think it will mean that we remove TV and radio. I think it's just a realignment. It's about saying, okay, we used to prioritize the 10 o'clock bulletin for news. Well, now we're actually going to prioritize getting it online first, or we're going to prioritize digital sort of methods of transmission. We're going to make sure we have a Twitter post, a Facebook post, a TikTok video explaining this situation when it's a breaking news story, for example. It's just about reassessing and just sort of changing things. It's a huge undertaking. Broadcasters are big organizations, and it will sort of affect every level of that organization. But it's just what's necessary in terms of remaining accessible and remaining relevant and valued by your audience.
But just piggybacking on a question I asked earlier about bias, but have we found that generally people share false information intentionally, or because they believe that it is true, that the information they're sharing is true?
I think it's a combination of both. There are definitely actors out there who are spreading information, false information deliberately because it's in their best interest or for political agenda, or it earns them money from clicks. There are people who do that, but there are also a lot of people who are victims of mis and disinformation, who might genuinely believe they are putting something out there that they want their friends and family to know. They want their friends and family to stay safe. But at the end of the day, they're unintentionally misleading those that they share the information with.
From a policy level, is there anything that governments can do to help with in media and information literacy?
For sure. So actually, this was kind of one of the focuses of a project that we had last year in the Caribbean that was looking at misinformation, trust in media, and media literacy. And for some context, that project covered 8 or 9 Caribbean countries, and we looked at the situation. We had a snapshot of media and information literacy, trust, and disinformation. And out of that research, we had some great recommendations. One of the primary recommendations really was about how we need to build the next generation of media literate citizens. So almost every single one of those 8 researchers recognized that we needed to have a widespread media and information literacy awareness campaign throughout the Caribbean and also within specific countries. And obviously that's something that would really involve the government. So they can look at how you can introduce or integrate media and information literacy into school curriculums. Right. We also recognize in that research that the issues of disinformation, media literacy, and trust in news really requires collaborative work, and that was something that was explicitly recommended. So looking at how we can bring together stakeholders, whether they're big tech or they're educators or they're media organizations, the government can look at ways on how to bring together those stakeholders so that you can target media and information literacy on every level. And also it's about policies that are related to watching the watchdogs. So in the Caribbean, from this research, we noted that there really is like social media is a kind of a breeding ground for citizen journalists. And oftentimes the barriers to entry for the media landscape, depending on what region you are in, it can be quite low. So it's not about necessarily trying to clamp down on journalists, but trying to raise the level of professionalism within the landscape so that we have journalists who are more critical, who are, while they're trying to put news out there, they're thinking about, is this factual? Have I gone through everything I need to make sure that this information, when it's out there, is the closest representation of the fact as I can possibly get? So those are just ways that not just the government, but stakeholders can look at implementing media and information literacy policies.
Yeah.
So actually, if I could add, we're building upon that first point, which is about building media and information, building the next generation of media literate citizens. And we're looking at how we can implement a media and information literacy project within the Caribbean next year with support from UNESCO, IPDC, and the UNESCO Trust Office for the Caribbean. And that project will put together school children, educators, and journalists.
Wow.
Wonderful, wonderful. My last question has to do with the Global Media and Information Literacy Week. Let's talk about some of the activities or information sharing that we can look forward to during that week.
Well, I think the UNESCO's Global Week for Media Information Literacy. You can find a lot of information out there on the UNESCO website. The week is going to be running from the 24th to the 31st of October. I know that the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean is actually holding like a panel discussion next Tuesday, which I'll be a part of. And that's kind of going to be reflecting on some of the initiatives within the Caribbean, what lessons we've learned from that, what more we can do in the future. And I think this week is really going to be just outside of the activities. It's going to be a great reminder and really timely to kind of reflect upon media and information literacy and the role that it plays within our societies. I mean, in the Caribbean, we know that we have made successes in this area, but there are also many opportunities that remain. And access to information and media literacy are really important to addressing many of the challenges that we have in the region, including disparities in access to information and communication technologies or issues such as information censorship. So we really need to take this week to kind of reflect on the fundamental role that access to information plays, but also reiterate why that access is a fundamental human right and why media and information literacy is essential in upholding that human right. Wonderful. So if you'd like to know more information about the week, definitely head over to UNESCO's Global Media and Information Literacy Week 2023 website. It's going to show you what's happening probably within the region, but also more globally.
And also, if persons would like to know more about the Public Media Alliance, how can they reach out?
Well, you can find us on our website, so that's publicmediaalliance.org. You can find us on social media. I believe that's Public Media PMA, so that's on Twitter/X, or you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then you can always send us an email at info@publicmediaalliance.org or editor@publicmediaalliance.org.
Wonderful.
And can I just add that
Go right ahead.
If you wanted to find out more about DESI, the project that DESI ran in the Caribbean from last year, just to it's publicmediaalliance.org/projects, and it will be under there. And there's some sort of resources and reports that came out of that project, which you can find in that as well.
Excellent. Excuse me. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us.
Thank
we
you.
certainly appreciated the information, and we look forward to all the information sharing and activities that will be taking place this Global Media and Information Literacy Week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Alrighty, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, it's all about the importance of the flu shot. And someone might be getting a shot. Don't go away.